Today we'll be talking all about how food connects us nutritionally, culturally, and globally. So we will first start by talking about how food connects us to our body, then move into connections with our community, and finally, how food connects with our culture. Our objectives for today are for all of you to understand how the foods we eat impact how we feel, both in the short and long term. Understand how food brings people and communities together and the benefits of communal dining. We'll learn how food connects us to our own as well as other cultures. And finally, we'll talk about healthy dishes from around the world. So let's first take a look at the components that make up all foods. And this is probably familiar to all of you, but we have the macro and micronutrients, right? So we have carbohydrates, which are the body's primary energy source, proteins, which are essential for muscle repair, immune function, and enzyme production, and fats, which support cell function and hormone production. And then we have a nice wide range of vitamins and minerals that play many different roles in the body, everything from energy production to bone strength, immune function, hormone production, and oxygen transport. And so each food has a unique makeup of these components, and that affects how we digest and absorb the foods and how our body reacts to the foods that we eat. So let's now think about how the foods that we eat impact our daily physical well-being. So the foods that we choose and the foods that we combine together are going to impact our digestion, our energy levels, our mental clarity and focus, even our immune function. So it's going to affect how we feel as we go through our daily activities. And not only what we eat impacts how we feel, but also when, how, and why we're eating. So I'll go through each of these components now. So in terms of what we eat, when we're choosing whole foods, and by whole foods, I mean foods that are minimally processed, right? Natural foods that retain their nutritional value. So we're thinking about the foods we see in that top picture, your fruits, your vegetables, whole grains, beans and legumes, unprocessed meats like chicken and fish. These foods are full of vitamins, minerals, complex carbohydrates, proteins, healthy fats, and fiber. And when we eat these foods all together, we're going to have slow digestion, right? It's not going to lead to a big energy spike, a big blood sugar spike. It's going to slowly release energy into your body. And that slow release of energy makes you feel pretty good, right? You have energy to get through your day. You have good blood sugar control, and it really carries you to your next meal. When we're eating more refined foods, right, foods that tend to be higher in sugar, calories, fat, and tend to be very low in fiber, those foods are digested very quickly, right? So you do get that big energy spike, that blood sugar spike, but then you tend to have a crash, right? So while it may feel good in the moment eating those foods, we don't always feel the best later. The other problem with eating a lot of these foods is that the more habitually we eat them, it does tend to cause cravings for more sugary, energy dense foods, which then leads to more blood sugar dysregulation over time. I want to talk a little bit about the timing of our eating as well, right? So it's important to eat regularly throughout the day. I'm sure we've all had the experience of maybe waiting too long till our next meal, and then it's really easy to overeat or be a little less discerning about the foods we choose at that next meal when we're too hungry. And so it's important to make sure that you are timing your eating well. You know, problems with the flip side too, right? If you're grazing all day, snacking all day, that can displace healthier foods that you might have at mealtime. So you do want to be mindful about eating at somewhat regular intervals throughout the day. And then, you know, how we eat also matters too, right? Are you eating your food really quickly while you're in the middle of your workday and just kind of scarfing it down, not really tasting your food? Or are you having a meal with family or friends, taking your time, enjoying your food, right? You get a lot more satisfaction out of that latter experience. So just kind of thinking about that as well. And then why we eat, you know, we eat for hunger, of course, but we find ourselves eating for many different reasons. It could be a social occasion, it could be boredom, it could be many different things. And so, being mindful of and conscientious about why we're eating and thinking about how it's going to make you feel in the moment is something also to pay attention to. Okay, so now let's zoom out and think about how over the long term, our eating is going to impact our health, right? So over time, our dietary patterns add up. And we know in the US, the leading causes of disease all are diet related. So if we think about diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, the way that we eat over time really strongly impacts our risk for these diseases, right? Because what we eat is going to impact our blood sugar levels, our insulin sensitivity, our cholesterol levels, our weight, our microbiome, right? So many different things that can be related to the progression of these diseases. And so while we don't have, a single diet that we say, this is the healthiest diet, this is the way to eat, we do know that certain patterns are very beneficial in mitigating health risks, right? So one of the most well-studied diets is the Mediterranean diet. And you can see in that graphic on the left, right, the emphasis is really on those fresh foods, fruits, veggies, whole grains. The Mediterranean diet puts particular emphasis on olive oil, which is sort of a unique component of this dietary pattern. And we have lots of evidence to show, reduced cholesterol, better blood sugar control, reduced risk of hypertension, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, even reduced cancer risk from the hydroxytyrosol in olive oil, which is one of the most powerful antioxidants that you're going to find there. So lots of good benefits to following the Mediterranean diet. Another similar dietary plan that we can look at is the DASH eating plan. So this stands for dietary approaches to stop hypertension. So it was originally designed as a blood pressure reduction strategy. But over time, we've seen that it actually leads to other benefits as well, general cardiovascular health, even reductions in gout occurrence. So lots of good things here. And you'll see a lot of similarities, right? Again, the focus is veggies, fruits, whole grains. Less emphasis on olive oil here, more emphasis on reducing sodium intake, again, because this was specifically for hypertension. But lots of overlapping ideas, right? Focusing on those fresh foods is really going to improve our long-term health. And then the last diet pattern we'll look at here is the American Institute for Cancer Research. So this goes over recommendations for preventing cancer. I really like this new American plate that they made. So this is a riff on the USDA My Plate guidelines, which you may have seen, and I'll show a graphic of it later, but it divides the plate into sections, and you've got like your fresh fruits and vegetables on one side, that's half your plate, and then a quarter of your plate are your carbohydrate foods, and a quarter of your plate would be the protein foods. So from a cancer perspective, the focus here is much more on plant-based foods. So they say make 2/3 of your plate some sort of plant-based foods, your vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and beans. And then just 1/3 of your plate can be some sort of animal protein, like your chicken, your fish, your beef. And this is very beneficial for preventing cancer because all of those fresh natural foods are great sources of antioxidants, phytochemicals, flavonoids, and all of these naturally occurring compounds can work against cellular damage in a variety of different ways. And so over time, the more of those that we're including, the more we reduce our risk of having, some sort of cellular mutation that can lead to cancer. And then AICR on this graphic on the right also points out, right, when we're eating the more processed foods, or if you're eating more processed meats, packaged foods, high sugar foods, that increases inflammation in the body and can increase the cellular damage, right? So that's increased cancer risk. Okay, so now I'm going to move over to looking at how food impacts our mood, our minds, and our immunity. So you've probably heard of the gut-brain connection. It's been, more commonly spoken about in recent years as we're learning more and more about this connection. And most of us have probably had the experience of sort of feeling like our brain is impacting our stomach, right? You're nervous, you're stressed, you might have a stomach ache, your bowel movements could change. So we've kind of probably all felt that connection in some way. The connection also goes the other way. So what's happening in your gut is also impacting what's happening in your brain. So the gut is actually lined with neurons, with nerve cells. So there's a whole nervous system located in your gut. And in the gut, your body makes neurotransmitters, especially serotonin. 95% of the body's serotonin is made in the gut. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that's going to impact your mood, can also inhibit pain, several other things. So the serotonin production is best happening in the gut when the gut is filled with healthy bacteria. And the way we get healthy bacteria in the gut is that we eat plenty of pre and probiotic foods. When we're eating foods that don't have pre and probiotics and we're eating a more inflammatory diet, there can be less healthy bacteria in the gut. And that increases the permeability of the gut, just decreases the overall, absorption of nutrients, right? It just leads to less healthy function over time. So when we're eating really well, we have that great serotonin production. You get an increased boost of your mood, right? Feeling happier, feeling better. And there's research that shows increased risk of mood disorders and depression when we have a less healthy diet and a poor gut microbiome. So similarly, the immune system also has a lot of function in the gut. About 70% of the immune system is located in the gut. And again, when we have healthy gut microbiome there, the immune system is nice and strong, right? Reduced gut permeability, good absorption of nutrients, good immune function. And if we have good immune function, we're reducing our risk of disease, okay? So let me go over some pre and probiotic foods. So this also may be familiar, but just a review in case anyone doesn't know. So the probiotic foods are going to be those foods that contain those live microorganisms, those good bacteria that we want to populate our gut with. So you can see the list here. You know, yogurt's pretty common here. You'll see some things from other cultures too, like miso, kimchi, great things to give a try if you haven't had them before. So many different options there. And then the prebiotics are those fibrous foods that are going to feed the good bacteria in the gut. So that's things like your wheat bran, legumes, lots of different fruits and vegetables, oats, barley, flaxseed. So again, many options. And when you're eating a diet rich in whole fresh foods, you're going to naturally be getting all of these things. Okay, so let's put that all into action. So how do we keep a good, healthy diet to keep us feeling good day to day and for our long-term health? So number one, portion control and nutrient density day to day is really important. Those plate guidelines are super helpful to use. They're really user-friendly. You don't have to measure or weigh anything. You can kind of eyeball your portions, but it can really help to make sure that, that you're getting the right types of foods in. Try to eat the rainbow so that you're getting a nice range of different nutrients. I recently went to a talk where the speaker challenged us to try to eat 30 different plant-based foods over the course of a week, which may sound like a ton. So, it's an interesting challenge. And if 30 is totally insurmountable, start with 10, right? Just set a goal for yourself and see how far you can get. Plan for success. So we always do better when we have a plan with food, right? Don't go to the grocery store starving with no list. We tend to then buy more processed foods and things that are less health supporting, right? So try to plan out your meals for the week, do your grocery shopping, cook in batches when you can so you have healthy things ready. It's good to keep low or no prep healthy foods on hand. So all of those things can really help keep you on track. And then keep healthy snack options ready as well. I think snacking for many of us tends to be a time when we reach for the less healthy things. So have easy things on hand, yogurt, granola, fresh fruits and veggies, a healthy dip like a hummus or a guacamole. Having those things on hand can be very helpful. And then last, don't forget to hydrate, right? Water is also essential for our digestion, metabolism, brain function. So you want to aim for at least 8 cups of water a day and then really try to limit any of those sugar sweetened drinks. Okay, so now we're going to move into how food connects us to our community. So people have been dining together since the beginning of time, right? We come together for celebrations, for religious events, rites of passage. There are many food events to gather over. And communal eating can be a really easy and fun way for us to share our culture and our foods with others. It also encourages us to find common ground, right? Have respectful discourse, learn from others, build traditions, and build relationships. And research actually does show that communal eating leads to increased happiness, satisfaction, trust, community engagement, and stronger relationships, right? So it really does go a long way to dine together. Okay, so practical tips for connecting with your community. So eat together, eat with your family, eat with your friends, whoever you reside with, your roommates, right? It doesn't have to be dinner that, I know that's commonly when we gather, but it can be breakfast, it can be a snack, it can be brunch over the weekend, but it's really beneficial to eat with others around you. You could think about planning a communal meal for family, friends, or coworkers. And make it a potluck, right? Reduce the burden of hosting. And then that can be a really nice way to taste different dishes from different cultures or even just try new foods in general. You could think about volunteering at a food pantry or meal service center to help provide nourishment to those in need. And think about tapping into your local foods, right? Join a CSA, shop your local farmers market, connect with local food purveyors, right? This is a great way to support our local farmers, support local small businesses, meet the people who are growing and providing your food, and just have a little bit more of a connection there. So I'm going to pass this off to Katie now, who's going to talk a little bit more about tapping into our local foods.
All right, so what's in season this month in New York City? The weather is still a bit chilly, so for March and moving towards April, we're a bit limited. But as you can see, we have chives, mushrooms and morels, ramps, which are also known as wild leek, sprouts, and horseradish and nettle. What do you usually want to look for when you're shopping for these produce? You want to make sure there aren't any mildew or any splotchy areas or anything that appears slimy. I also like to guide seasonalfoodguide.org as a reference. Here you can find a whole list of what's in season month by month. They also talk about how to prepare and cook these ingredients, as well as gives you a little bit of a nutritional information for each produce as well. Wanted to share some recipe ideas that we can incorporate all of these produce that's in season right now. Caramelized leek pasta. So this recipe includes regular chopped leeks, but in this case, you can swap that out with the ramps. Also includes chives, but feel free to add in some mushrooms and sprouts for increased fiber. Another recipe, which is similar to a spinach omelet, except in this case, it's nettle. Again, for nettle, make sure you purchase it when it's still young so that the stems are more tender and before the flower buds appear. Same thing with the pasta. You can, just like omelet, you can throw in some mushrooms, sprouts, or even adds a little bit of horseradish for that little kick. So no worries, as the weather gets warmer, we will have more choices in the coming months. Usually in the warmer weather, you'll find things like cherries, berries, peaches, arugula, spinach, tomatoes. All of these will come soon in the next few months. Another good resource is grownyc.org, which is where you can find your local farmers market. The good thing about our farmers market is they typically accept EBT or food stamps, so that's useful. Some common popular farmers markets that are available in New York City include Union Square, West 97th Street, Jackson Heights in Queens, and Sunset Park in Brooklyn. A nice little tip to help have access to some of these summer or spring fruits and vegetables year-round is through cold storage such as freezing or even a greenhouse. Lately, there's been more popularity with greenhouses. In the past, it was mostly if you had space, like a backyard, to have a greenhouse, but now they have mini ones that you can actually put inside your apartment. They're pretty affordable, about $20, $30 for the small ones to put in your own house. So you can look into that. I personally like to freeze batches of herbs so that I have access to it during the winter months. The culture. How does food connect us to our cultural identity and with each other across the world? So as you can see in this image here from the Umami Institute, you can see in terms of flavor or sauces, we share some things in common across the world. Usually it's some variation of tomatoes, fish or seafood, or fermented products like aged cheese, soy, or aged ham. So I like to use an example like ketchup, which I find very interesting, was originally from southern China in Fujian, where it was actually called ketchup. I could be pronouncing it wrong, but that's the Hokkien language. And that original recipe had fish in it, anchovies. However, through the British Empire, they eventually removed the fish from the product and added tomatoes. The original recipe in America for ketchup was actually tomatoes, spices, and brandy. Nowadays, our ketchup just has more and more sugar added, plus vinegar. Another interesting thing is when people think of food on its most basic level is we tend to think of it for survival, which is true. However, it is much more complex than that. It tells a story about our present and our past, how we connect with each other globally, whether it's through our history of colonialism, through trade with each other. So it also connects us to our history more intimately within our family. You know, recipes that are passed down through generations. So it's a very nice way to connect, not only get to know our own ethnic background more, but also with each other. The good thing is, as New Yorkers, we have the privilege of being exposed to a very diverse group of cultures here. For example, in Queens, there are over 130 ethnic backgrounds, which is one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the world. So really taking advantage of that privilege, we should get to know each other more, but also maybe our own ethnic background a little more intimately by exploring New York City or the other neighborhoods, the other boroughs as well. Another interesting thing about food consumption is that it's actually expressed through language. Now, I'll explain more what that means. So actually, I want everyone or whoever is able to participate right now. I want to ask you, when you think of food and nutrition, and I ask you fried eggs, when I say that, can you tell me through the chat box what comes to mind? I'm just gonna, okay, somebody said clogged arteries. Anybody else? Just clogged arteries? All right, or what about when you look at this image? Did I stop sharing? No. Okay, when you look at this image here, what comes to your mind? Egg equals breakfast, great. And also the image, any other ideas or comments of what comes to your mind when you see that? The image on the screen with the croissants, the bread, coffee, spread. Unbalanced. Okay, I just give just a little bit, some more time in case other people want to say anything. Nice presentation, but too much processed or refined food. Okay, great. So thank you for participating. So this was actually based on a real study that was done. So interestingly, so for example, the image I showed you is actually a typical French breakfast. The croissants is more of a weekend thing, not so much an everyday thing. But usually, yeah, it's a baguette, coffee, a little jam, butter on the baguette. So the thing is, with this study, it showed that generally French perspective, when you ask them what they think of what comes to mind with fried eggs, or simply looking at images like this, they tend to say breakfast. However, Americans generally, again, not everyone, but generally, will say things like what some of you mentioned, clogged arteries or unbalance. So Americans tend to think of what enters our body as opposed to, the culinary experience, which is what the French tend to think of. And this is just perspective. It's a bit ironic though, because, oops, sorry. It's a bit ironic because French have lower rates of cardiovascular disease, obesity, and they have a longer life expectancy. However, that's actually much more complex than simply perspective. But that is one example of how food as language is different just simply through perspectives of where we grew up. Another example that shows how we express food through language is in Japan. When you eat ramen, it's respectable to make slurping sounds, which shows that you're complimenting the cook, the chef, that they did a great job. It's really tasty. Whereas in Italy, it would not be well-mannered to make slurping sounds when you're eating pasta. Another example of how food acts as a connection through spoken language is, interestingly, how you say tea will give you a reflection of your origins. So there's only two versions of the word tea. There's tea, and then there's some variation of cha. So usually the variation of cha tells you if you had roots that were done by sea, or if trade routes were done by land, which is, cha is by land, and then by sea is tea. I apologize. So using a good example is the Silk Road. Any interactions with China, nearby, like Russia, India, usually you'll notice that they have some variation of cha, like chai. And then with tea, if you have interactions through the Dutch East Indian Company by sea, you'll notice you have some variation of tea, like in the English language, or even in French or German as well. All right, so I wanted to show you just some examples. Again, doesn't have to be breakfast, but these are just some common examples of breakfast that is consumed throughout the world. In Vietnam, you have pho, which is just soup, noodles with sliced beef, onions, herbs. Sometimes they add in other things like tripe or tendons. Ukraine, again, I could be pronouncing it wrong, but tvarog, so a fermented farmer's cheese with rye bread and fruits. Mexico, you have chilaquiles, which is made with using leftover tortilla chips, tossed in a red or green sauce with egg and avocado on the side. Italy, you have eggs in purgatory, which is very similar to shakshuka, but without the Middle Eastern spices. In Turkey, they call it kahvaltı, which is just simply means before coffee. So a Turkish breakfast would include eggs, olives, cheese, cucumbers, tomatoes, bread, along with a very strong black Turkish tea. In Myanmar, they have a dish called mohinga, which is a very deep broth made with fish and noodles. Northern India, you have puri, which is usually of bread that is served with potato curry. Switzerland, you have muesli, which is usually made out of raw oats with other grains, fresh or dried fruits, seeds, and nuts. Hong Kong, you have dim sum, which includes a variety of steamed buns, dumplings, cooked vegetables, congee, which is a rice porridge. In Sweden, Denmark, or Norway, typically it's open-faced sandwiches with various spreads and toppings. Greece, freshly made Greek yogurt, usually served with nuts, honey, or sometimes compote. Japan usually is a balance of tiny little dishes with miso soup, rice, pickled vegetables, natto, and along with green tea. Pakistan, you have different types of vegetable curries, sometimes with eggs, roti, and spicy sauces or chutneys on the side. In Egypt, you have fava beans that are stewed with different herbs and spices, along with their version of a pita bread and also with eggs. But that was just to give you an example. Sorry if I missed any other country. I just wanted to give you an idea. So this is a standard American breakfast. As you can see, it's usually fried eggs, some sort of processed meats like bacon, sausage, and some pancakes. So there was actually a research that was done on children that showed a lot of from intensive marketing campaigns, Americans tend to be taught, or maybe indirectly, that breakfast is only limited to certain specific foods, like cold cereal or this example that you see on the image there, compared to other cultures that are not given the same impression. However, based on this research, it showed that if you're able to change that perspective, knowing that it's okay to have other foods that you typically might consume for lunch or dinner for morning time, that tends to change and you become more open to trying other foods besides, bacon, eggs, and pancakes. Some healthy ways to modify our American breakfast is swapping out the regular pancakes with buckwheat pancakes or whole grain bread. Instead of choosing processed meats, you can use some of your leftover chicken that you had for dinner as your side, or fish. And you can also add some vegetables to increase your fiber by making a vegetable omelet. And also an option is to incorporate ideas from other countries, like some of the slides I showed you before, or some nice examples could be curry chickpeas and potatoes with some egg and whole grain bread on the side. Another example, again, taken from other countries, could be making a savory oatmeal dish instead. So most times we tend to eat it with fruits and honey, or just usually eaten sweet here, but you can do the same thing, but you can add soy sauce, boiled egg with kimchi and sprouts on top, just make it more of a savory thing. Another idea you can do is stewed tomatoes with beans, adding other herbs and spices along as a side dish with your rice maybe, or even, for example, using the Mexican idea of chopping tomatoes, onions, cilantro, lime juice, also as a side dish to give some flavor, and also jalapenos. So those are just some examples I wanted to give you to, give you some ideas that you can start incorporating into your daily meals. Okay, so I like these quotes because they kind of wrap up how food connects us to our body and also to each other. So from the late Anthony Bourdain, he said, food is everything we are. It's an extension, nationalist feeling, ethnic feeling, your personal history, your province, your region, your tribe, your grandma. It's inseparable from those from the get-go. And also, of course, for our own health, as Judy talked about in the beginning, let food be thy medicine from probably Hippocrates. Any questions? So actually, sometimes when you're shopping in the supermarket, you sometimes want to look down and not just eye level. Sometimes they have better deals on the lower shelf. They do that on purpose. They also tend to advertise the more processed foods, like those eye-catching sugary cereals. Again, they place it on purpose at certain eye levels just to make sure you're more likely to get it. Even when you're checking out, there tends to be little sections of snacks to convince you, like, oh, wait, one more thing to add to your bag to check out. I think that might be helpful tip to use. And also earlier I mentioned the farmers market. They do accept food stamps. So if anybody happens to have food stamps, that's a nice way to use your benefits.
Also important to just get active in your community to, help ensure that you're creating a good food environment for everybody who lives there, that there is access to fresh, healthy food, to regular grocery stores and not just bodegas and fast food. So, taking speaking to your Congress members and, donating money when you can, taking action in that way can make a big difference in the food environment. Yeah, so, we talked a little bit about local foods. I mean, that's a big thing that you can tap into to just make your choices more sustainable, right? You're reducing your carbon footprint significantly when you're getting foods that are grown locally and produced around you versus shipping things from all over the world. And, as wonderful as it is to tap into the other cultures, I think we can all probably bring more focus to, eating what's in season, getting foods from our local farmers market and food purveyors, just to reduce our impact on the environment. And I think that does help us connect to, our local food culture, to the foods that are indigenous to our area, and overall does make an impact on the environment.
So there's a lot of mixed studies on that, and it depends on what you're looking for, but usually it's not the best idea generally to do that long term. And it also depends on the individual. So for example, for a young woman, that actually can interfere with hormones. So our hormone levels, we go through phases as young women. So when you do intermittent fasting like that, actually can interfere with that, which is not good. In terms of cancer, same thing, the research is still kind of gray area, especially during treatment. Our priority is to make sure you get through the treatment and not have any major side effects. I understand there were some studies, although they weren't the best studies. They were done in a lab setting, for example, that showed maybe it might decrease side effects or increase the sensitivity to the treatment. Again, this is too new and too gray of an area to have more of a strong answer where I can say, oh, yes, for sure, give it a try or not. So just again, to make sure you're eating a well-balanced meal, just like we talked about today, is more important than just eating one meal a day. And I think eating one meal a day will be difficult to include all the nutrients that you need.
I'll add on to that also that, research shows that while there are metabolic benefits to intermittent fasting, as soon as you stop eating in that way, so if you resume a normal eating pattern, those metabolic benefits tend to be reversed. So it is quite challenging to do long term. And as Katie said, and I want to reiterate, and one meal a day can be very difficult to get in all the nutrition that you need, right? How many different things can you really get in just one meal? And so it is a challenge, and I think we'll continue to learn much more about intermittent fasting. It's definitely being studied, but there's some question marks there. Yeah, definitely. Kombucha is a great probiotic. Keep in mind there's a little alcohol content there, and we do want to be mindful about alcohol intake overall. It does increase your risk for certain cancers. I think, as one option of many probiotic options, yes, absolutely okay to include. Well, I'll say this. Learning to cook is probably one of the best things you can do for your health, because you just have so much more control over what you're putting into your body with cooking. But, cooking can be extremely simple, right? It doesn't have to be following a big long recipe and using every appliance in your kitchen, right? I mean, think about what you can do on a stovetop with, an egg and some greens, right? Like what Katie described with the nettle omelet, right? That's very straightforward. You don't need a lot of supplies. You don't need a lot of ingredients. So thinking about, dipping your toe in with some really simple, low prep, quick cook time recipes, I think is a great idea. If you really don't cook at all, it's important to get good at reading food labels. When you go to restaurants, ask good questions about the foods that you're ordering, right? You know, checking if things are fried versus baked, ordering a side that includes a vegetable, right? Asking maybe for a reduced portion of the starch so you get that balanced plate that you're aiming for. You just have to be, it's really important to speak up for yourself, right? When you're buying food or purchasing at a restaurant, see if they can make adjustments for you so that it really meets your health needs.
For communal eating, I think that could be actually a fun one, you know, maybe having a gathering with your friends and then just like a potluck, everybody can bring maybe something from their culture or something that was passed down through their parents or grandparents. I think that would be one way to be more inclusive. Dietary restrictions, that one is, you would personally, of course, have to ask your friends or family when you're doing these potlucks to make sure that people are being mindful of that. You know, maybe somebody has celiac disease, can't have gluten, you know, for example. So these are just some things that, you know, of course, you would have to alter based on your friends or family. You can have one whole egg a day. It is definitely been debunked for a long time already. Eggs do not directly cause high cholesterol. It's usually the ultra processed foods, the pastries, the saturated fats, all those things are more contributing factors to high cholesterol, of course, along with other things. But yes, you can have one egg a day if you want to, although they're kind of expensive now. So that could be something that might be holding you back anyways. But and I know for some people they're extra nervous about it because of just a genetic component. If you are genetically at risk, and usually say if you want to be extra safe, you can just limit to maybe just a few times a week as opposed to every day. All of the cancer prevention tips that Judy mentioned applies even when you have cancer, because you don't want to increase your risk of cancer coming back. You just don't, and they're just generally healthy to begin with, those tips. You know, for example, it was avoiding or limit as much as you can alcohol. Same thing with the processed meats like sausages, ham, cold cuts, bacon. You want to limit that as much as possible as well, and eating more plant-based foods, which has high fiber and other antioxidants and vitamins, and lean protein foods. So it still applies even if you already have it. Of course, depending on if you have treatment-related side effects, it might prevent you from eating some of these foods naturally. But it just depends what stage of the journey you're in your cancer journey treatment, and how you're feeling, of course.
And I'll also add quickly, you know, eating well as you go through treatment when you can is going to keep your healthy cells functioning really well and can help you to feel better also. So that's just another reason. Yes, but it depends on what type of chemo, what radiation, what area of the body. So that can be really individualized based on what's going on for you. But, you know, as an example, you know, if you're having radiation to the head and neck, you may have irritation in your mouth and throat. And so you may not be able to chew well. You're not going to want to be having things that are spicy or acidic or rough. So there are definitely alterations that need to be made for tolerance based on the treatment that you're getting.
It has a large role. Actually, it's been a lot of research that shows, depending on what you eat, actually think of a light switch can turn on or off certain genetic risk factors, whether it's genetic risk for obesity or risk factors for other chronic diseases, can be you're more at risk for depending on what you eat. So it definitely plays a huge role. And again, that's why it's so important to go back to what we talked about today, having a balanced meal with everything. You don't want to avoid or be too restrictive on any restricted diets. You want to be able to take in as much nutrient dense foods as possible. And this plays a role even when, you know, for those who are pregnant, same thing, it will have effect, again, turning on or off those light switches for certain genetic risk factors, also what you eat, whether it's before being pregnant or even during your pregnancy.